opposite line. Делегация. Ja.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I may ask for your kind attention, I would, on behalf of you all, like to ask the opening ceremony to begin. Flags do not go up.
Готові до постави.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and privilege to be able to open this joint conference of the ABN and EFC here in London, and on your behalf most cordially to welcome you on this very important occasion. I would like at the outset to give a special word of greeting to the people on the top table, the Honourable Jaroslav Stetsko on my left, General Singlao, Mr. Guillermo Kirkpatrick, Mr. Dotchev from Bulgaria, the Honourable Stefan Terlecki, Member of Parliament, Mr. Blinsky, Mr. Habib Meyer, and Mrs. Stetsko, and Dr. Haidt. We have a very slight alteration to the program. The main speaker, the Right Honourable Lord Chalfont, has been unavoidably detained, and he doesn't expect to be able to get here. We are therefore extending the opening addresses somewhat, and we will bring forward the ABN session. It is a great honour for me to be able to ask the Honourable Jaroslav Stetsko, the ABN President and EFC President, to open our proceedings. There is no one, I think, who has done more for the cause of freedom and liberation than Jaroslav Stetsko. Quite honestly, he's a legend in his own lifetime. And it's a great thrill for me as a United Kingdom Member of Parliament to be able to share a platform with him on this occasion and to be able to welcome him on behalf of you all. Mr. Jaroslav Stetsko.
Mr. President, dear General Singlov, Honorary Presidium, my co-fighters, ladies and gentlemen. Today's attention is focused on the summit between President Reagan and Soviet Russian dictator Gorbachev. The issue at hand is primarily military. The importance of this issue is a consequence of the gains of Russian imperialists under the guise of communism, whose primary goal is world domination. Only the collapse of the Soviet Russian Empire will decidedly eliminate the threat of nuclear or a nuclear holocaust. To achieve this, and attention must be drawn to the Achilles heel of the Soviet Russian Empire and its system, the subjugated nations. Without the inclusion of the issue of the subjugated nations in the creation of new realities in the world, all agreements and pacts of exclusively military nature will not eliminate the crisis. The crux of the matter lies not in the change of guard in the Kremlin, which will never disavow its imperialism and aggressiveness, but in the striving for freedom and national independence of the subjugated nations. In the final analysis, they are the key to the resolution of the world crisis, and in its context, they must be viewed as a political superpower. Naturally, the Антибільшовицький Bloc of Nations, ABN, is against nuclear war and proposes its own alternative for the elimination of the root cause of the present world crisis. The cause of the crisis is the existence of the evil empire. The ABN supports the zero option, a stance for the elimination of all nuclear weapons. The ABN also supports the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, as the most human proposal to date, one which destroys weapons, not people. No temporary solutions will solve the crisis if lasting solutions are not faced on a parallel basis. The subject of this conference is precisely to establish a basis for that lasting solution which, in our view, is rooted in the invincible human quest for freedom and independence inherent in every man and nation on earth. The key is to find a way to release the explosive power of revolution among the subjugated nations, which in turn would bring down the Soviet Russian Empire, the prison of nations par excellence. This should be the subject for consideration and study not only at our forum, but for the entire free world. Many erroneous formulae, theses, assertions, and comparisons must be corrected because the enemy's disinformation, his newspeak, has already infiltrated the ability of free man to perceive and speak the truth. For example, to place on the same ethical and political level both the United States and the USSR is to fall into the trap of the enemy's newspeak. Both superpowers have been equally blamed for causing the current global crisis and for the threat of nuclear holocaust. The call for mutual so-called concessions created the impression that both superpowers harbor criminal schemes to rule over the nations of the world. A comparison on the part of the United States would mean the surrender to Russia of Afghanistan, even West Germany or some other free nation. This is why all steps in favor of concessions, compromises, retreats, and so on by the USA would be equivalent to giving up the defense of the freedom and independence of some nation not yet dominated by Soviet Russia. Moreover, to give up the defense of still free nations and those already oppressed is equivalent to, in the long run, to renouncing one's own freedom and independence. What is the reason therefore of this world conflict? What does Soviet Russia really seek? Moscow's goal is to hold on to the subjugated nations and to gain control over increasingly more countries until the global domination finally is complete. By now, the goal should be known to all, although there is a lack of effort to voice this fact loud and clear. The crux of the matter is that Moscow's object of conquest, the captive nations fighting to stay free, be recognized as a power potentially capable to breaking up the imperial structure of Soviet Russia. Negotiations between Moscow and the West have yet to address the issue of the enslavement of scores of nations and hundreds of millions of people as a main cause of the current world crisis. If activated to the highest possible level, the subjugated nations' powerhouse can tilt the scales of history in favor of world freedom. This can be achieved through the strategy of psychological offensive, psychostrategy, on part of the West, designed to win over the hearts and minds of Soviet army personnel recruited from among the subjugated nations. As a result, in the insurgent strategy of the liberation process, they will progressively weaken the military machine of the Soviet Union and strengthen the fabric of their own nations until a critical moment is reached when they will turn their arms against the oppressor. By fostering and strengthening by means of the available communications technologies in the infrastructures of the subjugated nations, and by counterposing our system and philosophy of life to the Bolshevik system, such a psychostrategic strategic offensive can systematically undermine the Soviet Russian system of occupation. Moreover, if the West would cease its economic and other types of relations with the Soviet Union, including satellites, if it would stop supplying it with grain, technology, credit, and so on, Moscow would be forced to allow, albeit reluctantly, to revive the revival of socio-economic institutions, such as, for example, the private ownership of land to increase agricultural productions. This is in turn would strengthen the indigenous infrastructures of the captive nations, further undermining the colonial system of Soviet Russia in very real terms. The existence of the underground churches in the subjugated nations has not only a religious significance, but also profound lay and national implications. Faith in God is not only a theistic concept per se, but also a form of struggle of a nation's individuality and spirituality. Soviet Russian imperialism attempts to impose upon the nations it controls a totally aligned philosophy and way of life. Given this fact, the liberation process in the subjugated nations cannot be viewed only in military and technical terms, because we are dealing here with a revolutionary process encompassing all the spiritual, cultural, social, economic, political, and religious dimensions in the existence of those nations. Western psychostrategists should take notice of this unique revolutionary phenomenon taking place behind the Iron Curtain, a phenomenon which can be fully interpreted, analyzed, and conveyed by those representatives of the subjugated nations who are organically tied to their nation's spirituality and philosophy of life, by those who have not been affected by the scores of so-called progressivists and new speak created by the Soviet Russian Big Brother, to use Orwell's concept and this system. The rebirth of Islam in its worldly mainstream aspects will eventually be redirected against the real enemy of all religion and the Islamic nations, communists and Russian imperialists. Afghanistan today is the case par excellence. Unfortunately, Afghanistan has not yet become the rallying cry for the Shiites and Sunnites, and its plight is still ignored by the West. The main thrust of Islam's struggle has not yet been focused in its totality against its most dangerous enemy, Russian imperialists and communists. The issue of Afghanistan is not even duly included in the strategy of the West, not to mention an almost total lack of modern military assistance to the Mujahideen. And how many hours of programming is Radio Liberty broadcasting into Afghanistan, ridiculously few. Moreover, programming of, for example, of the Ukrainian Service of Radio Liberty has so far failed to serve the current liberation needs of the Ukrainian nation. We have already established that the psychostrategy of the West is decisively inadequate. One concrete example should suffice to illustrate the point that a suitable radio station should be made available to the ABN for unhindered broadcasting behind the Iron Curtain. Its long-range effect would more than compensate a given quantity of military hardware in terms of weakening the fighting capability of the Soviet armed forces. The theme of this conference, High and Low Frontier, Strategic Defense and Liberation, describes the path to follow if the free world is eventually to prevail over Soviet-Russian totalitarianism. High Frontier is the actual implementation of the results of the Strategic Defense Initiative (SDI). Low Frontier is a psychostrategic and political offensive against Soviet Russia which should be based on the inclusion of the captive nations as a vital element in the West's own activity measures, with a commitment to provide assistance to prospective insurgencies on the territories of the subjugated nations. The combination of High Frontier with Low Frontier fully addresses the search for a solution of the impasse in the current world crisis, provides a viable alternative to the threat of a nuclear confrontation between Soviet Russia and the West, offers a way out of the harm that the so-called disarmament process has become over the decade, and lastly, it provides a blueprint for dismantling the Soviet Russian Empire with the least threat to humanity. A synthesis of High and Low Frontier is today the only road that can lead to a world of peace, security, and freedom for all the nations on earth. The means of achieving a safe and free world are at hand. The United States and the whole free world must now master enough political will and moral strength to break out from the vicious circle of false detente, containment, spheres of influence, hopes of convergence of East and West, and embark on the road of saving humanity for oblivion. There is no other alternative. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed for those inspiring remarks at the beginning of our conference. I think you've focused the issues very directly, and we look forward to your continued participation throughout these days. Before I make my own speech, I would like to convey the greetings of a number of colleagues from the House of Commons and others. First of all, Mr. John Watts, the Member of Parliament for Slough, who was present yesterday at our reception. Mrs. Edwina Curry has personally told me to convey her greetings to the conference. She regrets that a previous engagement prevents her from attending. Mr. Tom Normanton, Member of Parliament and Member of the European Parliament. To my deep regret, I find I have a number of commitments during the 21st to 24th which I cannot change. I hope you will continue to relate my strong support to your organisation and to wish you every success in pursuing your objectives. Mr. John Butterfield, MP, also sends his greetings and wishes the conference every success. Mr. Robin Squire MP, I trust that conference will have a fruitful outcome. I send my most sincere greetings, he writes, and good wishes to those participating, and congratulate them on highlighting so many important issues. In all the comparisons that are drawn between countries of the Western world and those behind the Iron Curtain, we must never forget that those in Eastern Europe are denied what we take for granted, namely the right to express dissent and, above all, the right to remove an unpopular government. Pending the long-awaited establishment of such rights, it is clearly essential that we retain our vigilance and analyze our response to the Soviet Empire. My friend and colleague Winston Churchill, very many thanks for your letter of the 20th of September inviting me on behalf of the EFC to be present at a conference in London on the 21st and 24th of November. I very much regret I'm unable to be with you as I'm in the United States that week. However, I should be obliged if you would convey my warm feelings of solidarity with the peoples of the nations of Eastern Europe and others, including Afghanistan, Nicaragua and Cambodia, who have lost their freedom to Soviet oppression. Then from the Belarusian-American Union of New York, regretfully I will be unable to participate in the conference due to my professional duties. On behalf of the Belarusian-American Association, I avail myself the opportunity to extend greetings and best wishes to all the participants, and we hope that all members of the conference will successfully achieve its goals. We Belarusians join our forces with all subjugated and freedom-loving nations in the struggle for the liberation of our countries from Russian communist domination, and we join all those who intend and will preserve freedom of individuals and nations in the world. And lastly, Professor Magnino, health reasons prevent my participation. And then we have some others. Where are we? The Patriarch himself has written here. The Cardinal Miroslav Lyubachevsky, eminent Mr. President, distinguished Presidium, eminent President Stetsko, I greet all of you who have gathered at this conference of nations subjugated by the Soviet Union, nations which are seeking and fighting for freedom. May your deliberations be guided by the Christian spirit of freedom and justice in Christ's truth, which is the only liberating force. And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. John chapter 8, verse 32. His Excellency Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg. My dear Mr. Wilkinson, warmest thanks for the kind invitation to come to London for the meeting of the European Freedom Council. As I wrote to President Stetsko, it would have been a great joy and privilege for me to accept. To my great regret, nevertheless, it will not be possible. In the first place, we have on the 21st Political Committee, which I must attend, and in the second place, on the 22nd, 23rd and 24th, will be the Party Congress of the CSU, at which I have to be present as one of the CSU's representatives in the EEC. I regret this very much and wish great success. I do hope that some other time it will be possible for us to meet again. Mr. Liechtenstein, Ambassador and Senior Fellow, on behalf of the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. To all conference participants, it is a high privilege to send this message of solidarity and good wishes to all of you, on the invitation of our esteemed friend, Prime Minister Yaroslav Stetsko of Free Ukraine. We come together, whether in person or in spirit, as freedom fighters the world over. A single commitment inspires us all: to defend freedom where it exists, to advance freedom where it is denied. Both as an idea and as the most powerful force of our time, freedom is indivisible. Those of us who enjoy its blessings to the full dare not evade our broader responsibility. Wherever totalitarian oppression holds people in thrall, there is the enemy, and there must the battle be fought. The occasion of your conference provides an opportunity for our rededication. In common with tens of millions of my fellow Americans, I want you to know that we are with you, wholeheartedly and with inextinguishable ardor. May God bless our great cause. Congress of the United States of America, House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. Dear members of the European Freedom Council, it is an honor to be able to extend greetings to you as you meet in London to discuss the world's frontiers in defense and liberation. As we look back on 40 years of peace in Europe following the end of World War II, we are struck by how many have been denied the fruits of that peace. And yet we are also struck by the dauntless resiliency of the human spirit and the drive for freedom that lives in the hearts of those trapped behind the Iron Curtain. It is that same spirit that inspires the freedom fighters in many parts of the world. Places such as Afghanistan, Angola, and Mozambique, Nicaragua, Cambodia, and Laos. I believe that it is incumbent upon all free men and women to align ourselves with the forces of freedom, that all people may someday know the true peace of liberty. Finally, it is clear that freedom cannot expand if the free world stands vulnerable to Soviet intimidation. We must look first to our own defense and that of our allies in order to reach out to others. In that undertaking, the Strategic Defense Initiative proposed by President Reagan is a moral imperative. My compliments on the good work of your Council, and my best wishes for a successful conference. Jack Kemp, Member of Congress. This is from the Ukrainian Orthodox Catholic Church, and it is addressed to His Excellency Mr. Yaroslav Stetsko, President of the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations. Eminent Mr. President, I am grateful for your invitation to attend the ABN Bloc of Nations Conference, which will be held on November 21st, 24th, 1985. Unfortunately, I will be unable to attend the conference in person. Therefore, I extend to all the attendants my greetings. May God's blessing guide your work. With love in Christ, Archbishop Anatoly. This is from the Apostolic Exarchate for Ukrainians of the Byzantine Rite in Australia and New Zealand. To Mr. Yaroslav Stetsko, Prime Minister of Ukraine, President of the ABN. Sir, news of the coming conference, about which your letter of September 25th informed me, was pleasant reading, and were I younger and freer, I would gladly be present. As a member of a nation occupied by godless terrorists and deprived of elementary freedom, freedom to pray, I can only rejoice when I learn of conferences productive of greater understanding of the menace of atheistic communism. Knowing that the stooge Russian Orthodox Church is in my homeland, Ukraine, deliberately out to destroy the Ukrainian Catholic and Orthodox churches, and seeing Russian imperialism spreading like a plague in Africa, Afghanistan, Cambodia, etc., with all freedom-loving people, I rejoice that in the latter part of this month in London will be this conference about which you have told me. With all my heart I desire, and most earnestly do I pray, for the success of this conference. May the blessings of God be showered on all those present. While you thus commemorate the 40th anniversary of the termination of World War II and the last decade of the Helsinki Accords, may you especially be enlightened by Almighty God and enabled to make more and more aware of the menace of atheistic communism. May we all live to see the not too distant day when the world is truly free and when nations and free individuals are no longer jailed, tortured, or killed for desiring to be so. Yours most sincerely in the King of Peace, Bishop Ivan Prasko, Eparch for Ukrainians in Australia, New Zealand and Oceania. Diocese of Stamford, Connecticut, United States of America. Dear conference participants, I have been informed that you shall be meeting in London, England from November 21st to 24th, 85 to deal with a host of problems, the main theme of which is high and low frontiers, strategic defense and liberation. The topics you will deal with are varied, yet their study is necessitated by the continual cancerous growth of communism throughout the world. Vigilance must be exercised to combat its atheistic philosophy and to return a lasting peace to the world. May your sessions be fruitful and aid the subjugated peoples of the world in soon realizing genuine freedom for their respective countries. With every good wish, I remain sincerely yours. Basil, Bishop of Stamford. United States Senate, Washington, D.C. Yaroslav Stetsko. Sir, it is a pleasure to send my warm greetings to you and each of the participants in the EFC ABN Conference. May your deliberations be guided by the wisdom and love of freedom so evident in your planning and purposes. Efforts such as yours are important to all free people everywhere. I congratulate you, and with you I pray for every success, now and in the future. Sincerely, Rudy Boschwitz, United States Senator. Institut européen pour la paix et la sécurité. This is to myself. Dear colleague, I thank you very much for your cordial invitation of 20th September, which I only discovered now after election campaign activities have slowed down. But I am afraid I shall not be able to commit myself until the very last moment. As you probably know, the re-elected majority in Belgium is now in the process of forming the new government, and according to the responsibilities that will be given to me, it is very likely that I will be sent on mission during the very time of your conference. If I should not be able to attend, and he can't, I will send greetings to be read out during the conference, as you suggested. Wishing you the best of success, I remain yours sincerely, General Robert Claus, retired Senator. House of Commons, London. From Bill Walker, MP. Sir, thank you for your letter of 20th September. I hope to attend the conference of the EFC. However, if parliamentary duties prevent me from attending, I wish the President and the Council every success in their efforts to maintain the interests of the free world and to sustain the freedom fighters from behind the Iron Curtain. Bill Walker, Member of Parliament, Perthshire. State of Michigan, United States of America, Office of the Governor. Distinguished delegates, on behalf of the State of Michigan, I would like to convey my greetings and best wishes on the occasion of this conference on high and low frontiers, strategic defense and liberation. Through forums such as this, we in the free world are able to exchange ideas and information on the plight of those whose freedom has been curtailed or denied through political and economic repression. We in Michigan stand firmly behind the cause of freedom for all peoples and wish you every success in your deliberations. James Blanchard, Governor. Here's one from an old friend of mine. Congress of the United States, House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. Dear Mr. Stetsko, I consider it a great privilege to be able to send my greetings and this brief message to you at this time. The struggle against communist oppression that has been so diligently and bravely carried on by the people of your organization is indeed worthy of recognition and support. The example set by the many fearless martyrs who have given their lives in this struggle is an inspiration to all people everywhere, but especially to those who live beneath the yoke of communism. I am reminded of the words of the great patriot of this country, Thomas Jefferson. He must have understood very well the price of freedom, for he stated, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots." Certainly those who have given their lives in the 40-year struggle against communism know all too well the meaning of Mr. Jefferson's words. I have no doubt that they considered it not only a necessity but an honor to give their lives for their country. Mr. Jefferson also made another statement that bears repeating, as we honor the brave patriots of so many countries struggling under communist oppression. He once declared that "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." The tyranny that the communists have tried to exercise over the minds of the free peoples in this world must never be allowed to triumph. I know that with your efforts it never will. For your spirit of freedom and liberty is strong and will remain strong. It is our duty, indeed our privilege, to support this ongoing struggle to restore the lost democratic principles of political and cultural self-determination that have been wrested from numerous countries by the communists. Let us never forget the sacrifice of those who have given their lives for the cause of liberty. And let us renew our pledge to fight every form of tyranny over the mind of man. Philip M. Crane, Congressman. We have indeed, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, over 100 messages, and we could be here till lunchtime were I to continue. And we will read other greetings later on. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Ms. Jaroslav Stetsko, Madam Stetsko, fellow parliamentarians, Stefan Terleski and Guillermo Kirkpatrick, General Singhal, distinguished guests from all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. It is a tremendously exciting thing for me as a British Member of Parliament in this fine city of London to be able to greet you and welcome you to the capital city which houses the mother of parliaments and which has for so many a long year been regarded as a bastion of freedom and democratic liberties. As the years have passed, and as in this country the memory of war has thankfully receded, it is nevertheless very important that we who are working together in a great struggle for self-determination and freedom from communist oppression in those countries that are currently enslaved by Marxist-Leninist governments, it is very important that we should explain to our fellow citizens what the truth is behind the Iron Curtain and in those countries that are captive today. I often think that our greatest enemy is not just the threat that faces us, and we all know the dimensions, the awesome dimensions of the Soviet military machine. That is not, in a sense, the greatest threat, ladies and gentlemen. The greatest threat rests right here, in this country, maybe even in some parts of the United States. I hate to suggest it, but maybe even there too. The threat of complacency and taking things for granted, assuming because our life here in these privileged Western democracies is relatively comfortable and peaceful,
secure and prosperous, that must necessarily continue, and that it is perhaps even our right to continue to enjoy a high standard of living and ease and material prosperity. But history teaches us very differently. In the life of nations, as in personal life, when all is seemingly well, fate is always round the corner with a sandbag. So you have always to be vigilant. You have always to assume the worst. And I am glad that our alliance of free countries, the North Atlantic Community, the NATO alliance, has sustained the President and the administration of the United States in the preparation of the summit conference, which has just concluded at Geneva. There has been, I think, considerable unity within the Western Alliance, and this has undoubtedly strengthened the authority of the President of the United States and meant that in the negotiations that have just concluded, the President has not weakened. He has stuck to the principles for which we believe. The principles, namely, that the West has a right to be properly defended, that the peoples behind the Iron Curtain have an entitlement to human rights, like the countries of the free world, and that tensions should be eliminated where they threaten to cause conflict. For example, in the Near East, Southern Africa, Central America, Southwest Asia, and Indochina. But over all these deliberations, there has loomed the greatest issue of all, the threat of nuclear warfare. And that nuclear threat is what people desire most earnestly to be lifted from the heads of mankind. And modest progress has undoubtedly been made, because while President Reagan has stuck firm to his principles, he has at least achieved a dialogue with General Secretary Gorbachev, and the dialogue will continue. Now, the theme of this conference, High and Low Frontiers, Strategic Defense and Liberation, is, I believe, an exceedingly good one. Because when we're looking at the questions of security for the free nations and liberation for the enslaved, there are, in a sense, two dimensions. There is the upper strategic dimension, the mutual balance of terror, the deterrence created by the nuclear forces on either side, and of course the whole panoply of armaments of an intermediate range nuclear kind, of a tactical kind, of a conventional nature that sustain them. And there is the lower but equally important level of the psychological and ideological conflict and political struggle that are maintained at the same time. And in a sense, they are both equally important, because it would be no good for us to deter war and ensure that a nuclear holocaust never came. Maybe preserve Western Europe from the horrors of conventional attack or nuclear blitzkrieg. But if we were to lose the political struggle, if our countries were to be subverted from within, and our governments change from a democratic nature to a totalitarian, socialistic, communist kind, then we would, in a sense, have lost all that our armament and defense were seeking to preserve. And at the other level, it would be no good if we maintained our democratic liberties and we were very successful in spreading the attractive message of pluralist democracy under the law, if at the same time we allowed our defenses to become weakened and we became subject to nuclear intimidation or blackmail by overwhelming military force, or even because of our very vulnerability, subject to aggression itself. So I do think that both the dimensions that are being addressed in this conference are valid, that they interrelate, and that they are worthy of the detailed consideration which they will receive. Now, let's just look at some of the areas that were addressed in the Geneva talks. First, the issue of disarmament and arms control. As you will remember, the Soviet position was to seek a 50% reduction in nuclear delivery systems on either side. Strategic delivery systems, I mean. Now, what the Soviets mean by strategic delivery systems is not the same as what we in the West regard as strategic delivery systems. And there's an exceedingly important distinction here, ladies and gentlemen. Because the Soviets regard as a strategic delivery system anything that can hit the heartland of the USSR. And that rules into the equation all our intermediate range nuclear forces in Western Europe, stationed here on behalf of the NATO alliance, which are of limited range, but in Sovietized strategic, yet crucial for the defense of the democracies of Western Europe. An essential part of the linkage of the Western European station capabilities and those deployed by our American friends in the homeland of the United States. And clearly what the Soviets are seeking is a build down in these, while of course they themselves will, for geographical reasons, be very easy, owing to the propinquity of the Soviet Union to the free countries of Western Europe, be able to strike still relatively easily at the United Kingdom, West Germany, and so on. So that's one element of the equation that we've got to look at very, very carefully, exceedingly cautiously. And the other is, of course, the question of warheads. Because the Soviets have been exceedingly imprecise when they talk about a 50% reduction. The Soviet strategic nuclear arsenal is characterized by very modern intercontinental ballistic missiles that have characteristically more multiple warheads than do their American counterparts. So what is important is not so much a reduction in the number of launchers, but a reduction, a mutual and balanced reduction in the number of warheads. Then the next part of the communique deals with the non-proliferation treaty. And both superpowers want more countries to sign. Well, that I think is self-evidently desirable. No one would query that. But the fact that so many countries have not signed is, in my judgment, Mr. President, evidence of the necessity of maintaining that high frontier defense, that strategic defense, which is being researched through the Strategic Defense Initiative program. We will know by the end of the decade which technologies look to be feasible and practical. The US administration will have some estimation of the relative costs involved and will be able to come to decisions at that time. But since a number of existing nuclear countries, like the Chinese and the French, for example, and other potential nuclear powers like Israel, South Africa, India, Pakistan, maybe even